Hello chess friends and welcome to the channel. Today we're looking at a game from the Wijk aan Zee 1999 tournament, a game from the third round between two of Netherlands' top players, Jeroen Piket with white and Jan Timman as black. Garry Kasparov won this tournament, Anand was second and Kramnik came in third, but Piket ended in 5th place and Timman in 7th place out of 14. So Piket starts the game with the move d4 and Timman replies with the somewhat unusual e6, inviting white to play e4, and then we have the French defense, but Piket doesn't want that and plays c4 instead. And Timman replies with b6, transposing to the so-called English defense. And Jeroen Piket decides to take all the space he can get in the center with the move e4, bishop b7, knight c3 defending the pawn on e4, bishop b4, renewing the threat to take on e4, and here you could play bishop d3, but it's not so great after f5, and I won't go into that because that's not what this game is about. So instead of bishop d3, Jeroen Piket here plays a better move, which is f3, just cutting out all shenanigans from the bishop on b7 along that diagonal, and Timman plays f5 anyway. And we have an exchange on f5, and now white played knight h3. Stockfish prefers queen e2 with a possible continuation like this. And long castles with an exciting game. But knight h3 was played, knight c6, bishop comes flying out to g5, knight f6. Now does come the check on e2, and king f7 threatens to play the move rook e8 with a pin. Piket castles on the queen side, indicating that he wants a sharp fight, and Timman immediately responds by doubling up the pawns on the c-file, trying to create some weaknesses around the white king later on. And then he plays h6, asking the bishop what it wants to do. Here bishop h4 is kind of taunting black to play g5, which he doesn't do right away, but does do quite soon. And we'll see that white will actually take advantage of that, because the pawn, once it's gone to g5, it won't be able to defend the black king as well. Queen e7 offering an exchange of queens, but white wants to play an attacking game, so he just moves the queen out of the way, and now g5 comes, and bishop f2, knight to a5, already targeting the pawn on c4, which is a weakness, but not an important one in this game. And here white takes the open file, the e file, queen goes away of course, and now a really nice move, rook e5, attacking this pawn on f5. Perhaps surprisingly, this pawn is not that easy to defend. Here actually the computer recommends giving the pawn with a move rook e8, rook takes f5, bishop c8, and then moving the d pawn. White's still better, but this is what the computer recommended for black. Timman did play f4, didn't want to lose that pawn, but already here, even though white didn't play it, knight takes f4 was actually an incredibly strong piece sacrifice. And after g takes f4, bishop h4, there are some serious problems for black, even though it might not look like it. For example, after rook g8, bishop d3, you can see here that the bishop on d3 is covering the g6 square, which is an important square because the rook on g8 wanted in many lines to defend the knight on f6. So for example, in the line rook e8, there is the winning move simply to take the knight and then win the queen on f8 with this skewer. So this is a threat that is not so easy to meet actually after bishop d3. For example, queen g7, there is rook f5, and then basically winning the knight on f6. Also, let's say knight c6, then rook f5, threatening to take on f6 of course, and after rook g6, rook takes f4, black is again in some serious trouble since the rook on g6 is now attacked. So this is just to show how incredibly dangerous it can be if you move the pawns close to your king, away from your king, like Timman did here with the move g5. Then there was this immediate knight takes f4 sacrifice, which Piket actually didn't do. He played rook f5 with a great position, but the piece sacrifice was even stronger. So here Timman played rook g8. And again, the bishop is coming out to d3. It's going to be a really strong bishop later on in this game, as you'll see. Bishop a6, but as we'll see, this pawn on c4 is not really the important thing in this position, because now, actually, even though the computer says it's not the strongest move, the computer actually recommended d5, and I won't go too deep into that. A very interesting move played by Jeroen Piket here was knight takes f4, so now comes this knight sacrifice that was a little bit stronger earlier, but it's still quite a shocker. And Timman took this knight, and then comes bishop h4, threatening to take on f6. And so the question is, what can you do about it? And the answer is, well, not that much. If you defend the knight like this, and then again rook takes f4, threatening to take on g6, and then on f6, and if you try to block, since you are a piece up, then there's an incredible move here, which is the move rook f1. The point being that if you take on c4 like this, then rook takes f6, and obviously have to take that, and now this incredible move f4, just ignoring that the piece on d3 is hanging, because if you take that, then f takes g5 with a double check will win the queen on f8 with a winning position. So quite some nice stuff. And also here, instead of bishop takes c4, if you play king g7, then takes, and rook f5 with a winning position. The queen can come to d2, for example, to increase the pressure on g5 if needed, and so forth. So this is quite winning as well. So after bishop h4, we were looking at why rook g6 doesn't work, and Timman played rook g5, just trying to block everything, give some material back to remove some of the white attacking pieces. White takes, black takes here, and now a really nice move again with a move h4. White is now threatening, obviously, to take on g5 with a pawn, and Timman is just desperately trying to stop all these advances with a move queen h6 now. But then more problems for black after the move rook e1. So notice how black doesn't have time to meet white on the open e-file, because there is this big threat to take on g5 with a pawn. So black has to deal with that. But then queen e2, and now there is just no way to stop white from entering along the e-file, because if we look at black's options one by one, let's start with the worst option, which would be rook e8. You might think this was a move, but unfortunately it's not a move, because this can just be taken since the knight on f6 is pinned, and then there is simply a mate like this. So obviously that's no good. What about queen f8, for example, to try to defend the e7 square? Well, that runs into rook takes f6, check. A really nice move again, and then queen e5, king f7, and there is basically a forced mate here after the move queen f5, also queen h5, by the way. And here we have the check and the checkmate like this. So this was queen f8 against queen e2. What about king g8? And then queen e5 is just completely crushing, threatening the knight on f6. And let's say you defend that, and then there is a deadly check here on g5. If you play king f7, there is checkmate like this. And if you play king h8, there is the move rook g6, and the black position just comes crumbling down. There's just basically nothing for black that works after the move queen e2 here. We looked at moves like rook e8, queen f8, and king g8. Timman tried rook f8 to try to defend the knight on f6 a little bit better. Actually, the strongest move was queen e5. With the sample line, bishop takes c4, now rook takes f6 is a really cute move, to say the least. After queen takes, there is a forced mate here with queen h5 and queen h7. This is checkmate. So that was queen e5, which would have been an even stronger move, but Jeroen Piket instead played queen e7. And after king g8, he had a really nice move here, a really strong move, which is an exchange sacrifice with rook takes f6, just removing a really strong defender and allowing the remaining white pieces to dominate. After rook takes f6, which was played, queen takes d7. You can see how the rook on e1 will now be able to enter on squares like e7 and e8. And here queen g7 was played, but basically nothing works. For example, after rook f7, there is rook e8, rook f8, and queen d5, and this will win without going into all the details. I'll just take too long for this video, I think. Bishop takes c4 is another try, but bishop takes, knight takes, rook e8 again. White may be a piece down, but he's got a winning position because of the weak king and the incredibly strong queen and rooks. Queen d5 check, rook e6, and let's say queen g7, now queen h5, and then if you block with the queen, then rook h6 winning the queen, or if you go king g8, then again winning the queen with this pin here. So there's just always something for white after queen takes d7, and queen g7 was played, and now came rook e8 check, and so obviously you don't have a lot of options here. Notice also the bishop on d3, how strong that bishop is, controlling some key squares like h7, rook f8, and now even though queen d5 was the strongest move, rook e7 is also strong, which was played. Now rook f7 to block. Here queen e6 is basically a very, very annoying move for black, and there's a big check on e8 coming from the rook, and there's basically nothing you can do about it. If we look at some options like bishop takes c4, then you can see that the only legal move for black here is queen f8, which obviously isn't gonna work out well. Also queen f8. Obviously you could play rook e8 here, but there's actually an even rook e8 winning the queen, but there's actually an even nicer move that I wanted to show you, which is this bishop h7 check. So for example, if you play king g7, then queen g6 check wins after this and this, and if you take the bishop, then you lose basically the house. Everything goes more or less. So this is why after queen e6, this is a really strong pin by the queen, pinning this rook on f7. This is why black is in so much trouble, because the threat of rook e8, there's just nothing to be done. We looked at queen f8 and bishop takes c4, which don't work. Queen f6 was played, but after rook e8, Timman resigned because there's actually a forced mate in only 3 moves here. After the only move king g7, white will play queen g4, and after king h6, here will come the check, rook h8, and this is a nice deflection tactic. If the queen takes, there is checkmate like this, and if you block like this, there's checkmate like that. So nice attacking game by Dutch Grandmaster Jeroen Piket against his compatriot, legendary chess player Jan Timman. But I thank you very much for watching this game with me today, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.